My name is Evelyn Cross, a major in the Federal Military Intelligence Bureau. I am 36 years old. For most of my life, I've heard a recurring refrain from the very man whose nod shaped every room I entered. Useless. I still remember that day's room clearly. The National Strategic Hall, with high ceilings and yellow lights pouring down on rows of crisp uniforms and shining medals. In the middle of the stage, General Marcus Cross stood like a statue, his voice metallic as it cut through the air. Language? He paused, glancing in my direction. Completely useless. The Army needs warriors, not whisperers. The words landed in silence, like a slap without a hand. Some officers turned to look at me, middle row, sitting straight, with cold eyes. He was my father, and it took me more than 3 decades to understand that, to him, my mind and my voice were not a legacy, but a burden. But as soon as he stepped down, another voice spoke up. It wasn't loud, just cold enough to cut through the space. "Major Cross, bring her up here. We need a whisperer." That was General Adrian Holt, commander of the Military Criminal Intelligence Bureau, the real power in this room. One by one, then row by row, the seats stood up, silently saluting. They weren't saluting him, they were saluting me. And for a moment, I saw something I had never seen in my father's eyes my whole life. Fear. The last time I went back to that house, the wallpaper had started peeling at the corners. The suffocating scent of polished wood and order clung to everything. The house was on the edge of the Maple Ridge Hills, close enough for Father to get to command every morning, and far enough away that no reporter would venture near. The fences were trimmed as sharp as knives. The flag in the front yard had never drooped, and the front door only opened for worthwhile occasions, never for warmth. I was 17. It was Thanksgiving. My mother had passed away long ago, and dinner was just Father, Damien, and me. Damien had just returned from West March Academy, while I clutched an envelope in my skirt pocket that made my heart race every time I touched it. An acceptance letter to St. Boyne, Albans University, with a full scholarship in linguistics. It had been my dream since I was 12, when I translated moss-covered Latin tombstones just to watch each letter come to life. I waited until the pumpkin pie was served, until my stepmother raised a glass to compliment Damien's posture. "Father," I said, my voice clear. "I got into St. Albans. Full ride. Linguistics." I pushed the envelope towards him like a gift. He picked it up with 2 fingers, glanced at the school crest, and set it down beside a gnawed chicken bone. "Language is not the future, Evelyn. It's a hobby. Do you think a soldier on the battlefield needs poetry?" I glanced at my stepmother. She poured more wine. Damien laughed. "Maybe you could be a translator at an embassy." Father raised his glass. To Damien, the real future of this family. The glasses clinked. No one's eyes met mine. That evening, I stood alone in my old room, holding the envelope like a life raft I wasn't allowed to cling to. My mother's French dictionary was still on the shelf, its cover corners frayed. The page marked at a sentence she once read. "Words are bridges, Evelyn, not walls." But to my father, if a wall couldn't be broken with a gun, it wasn't worth existing. That night, I stopped seeking approval. I stopped wanting to be the daughter he wished for, but I would become something else. Something he would never see coming until it was too late. I didn't go to St. Albans. I enlisted in military intelligence. If I was invisible in my family, I would become a ghost in a uniform. I was at Ravenholm Base, Northern Europe, when the call came. It was December. This kind of cold didn't need wind. Just standing outside for 3 minutes made your breath feel like needles in your lungs. I had just finished a joint briefing with NATO liaison units when my secure phone vibrated. No number, but I didn't need to look at the screen to know whose voice was on the other end. Evelyn. My father never used father-daughter terms. He spoke my name as if reading a directive. The last time we had spoken was over a year ago. "Your brother needs a favor," he said, his voice as flat as a status report. Then Damien's voice broke in, smooth and falsely friendly. "Hey sis, heard you're making waves. We wanted to ask you before you went too far." I didn't answer. They weren't calling to check in. I knew it, and they knew that I knew it. Father got straight to the point. "You're working with Aegis Logistics there, aren't you? Their system handles your unit's communication channels." "In part," I replied slowly. "What's the matter?" There's a report about a coding error at Aegis. It's a minor thing, but it could be blown out of proportion. We need it to be a little more discreet." He used the word need as if it were a command. Damien interjected, "It's nothing big. Just remove some redundant technical details. Emphasize the efficiency. Family helps family, right?" I stared at the wall in front of me. A cracked brick, a cold draft on the back of my neck. They weren't asking me to edit. They were asking me to falsify a classified document to protect a private military contractor that I knew had family money flowing into it. "I won't do it," I said, without raising my voice or explaining. The silence on the other end was thick and long. Then my father's voice dropped to a familiar low level, the voice that had torn me to pieces as a child. "Have you forgotten who gave you the name on your chest, Major?" I kept my voice calm. "Have you forgotten who earned it?" I hung up. My fingers shook for a minute afterward. Not from fear, but from clarity. That was the last thread, the final test. They wanted to know if I still belonged to them, and I had answered with silence. 3 days later, the silence answered back. With gunfire. We had a meeting with 2 faction leaders, part of a fragile ceasefire agreement in the Vaynar Canyon. The safe house was reinforced concrete, with signal jamming equipment and a 3-layer entry check. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until the static began. I was sitting near the signal console when it buzzed. At first, it was just interference. Then a voice, low and deliberate, in Serbian. "Mala, little girl. Is your father disappointed in you?" I froze. No one outside my team, and a few people at command level, knew my codename, Cypher. No one, except my family. The glass door shattered. Automatic gunfire sliced through the room like a saw. My body dropped before my brain could give the order, a reflex ingrained in my muscles. I yelled for cover, pulled both leaders to the floor, and drew my gun with the other hand. Dust, smoke, screams. A piece of concrete tore through my skin, leaving a hot streak on my shoulder. But the pain hadn't fully set in. My team's return fire was clean and precise, but we were pinned down. Someone knew our timing, our route, and the room layout. This wasn't luck. This was a surgical strike. 19 minutes. That's how long we held out, until the sound of rotor blades cut through the fog. When the helicopter landed, one teammate was unconscious, another was in critical condition. The attackers vanished into the woods, leaving behind shell casings, blood, and questions no one wanted to answer. Back at the base, with my shoulder bandaged and my voice hoarse from yelling commands, I understood immediately. The voice, the timing, the way they knew my codename, and the only possible path for that information to leak. The Aegis system, the people who wanted me silenced, were my own flesh and blood. They transferred me to Drexler Command just 2 days after the ambush. On paper, relocation for security. In reality, exile. Everyone understood the subtext. When an intelligence officer is nearly assassinated during a peace mission, and the official report attributes it to local instability, it means a thick layer of dust has been cast over the truth. They put me in a general analysis room. Rows of long desks, interconnected computers, cold blue fluorescent lights. The job? Read combat reports, type a few comments, stamp them, and send them on. Everything was designed for me to fade away, to become a faint name on a personnel list. I read my own file carefully, the official report on the ambush. It read more like a template than a military debrief. Everything was clean, neat, and completely devoid of any sign of betrayal. As if I had never heard that voice. As if the bullet in my shoulder was an accident. I called Noah Kane on the second night. He picked up after 2 rings. "Major." His voice was low, almost a whisper. I read the report. "It's garbage. I need your help." But not through official channels, I figured. I told him everything. The call from my father, Damien's voice, the leaked codename, the static before the glass broke, the details in the Aegis system that didn't match any security protocol. Noah listened without interrupting. He just said, "Send me all the data. We'll dig to the bottom of this." 2 weeks later, I was living in the shadows of the system. The computer screen was like a nighttime lake, flat, but with 1,000 layers of movement underneath. I reviewed the entire Aegis encryption and logistics channel audit log. On the surface, Everything looked normal, but every sentence, every phrase had a trace. Sentences that were too long, flowery vocabulary used to hide a missing number. I remembered something a professor at St. Albans once said. Liars always make the sentence bigger than the truth it hides. Noah, meanwhile, was buried in the system logs from the Bosnia campaign, where Aegis was also a contractor. He discovered ghost syntax, neat, precise gaps, as if a piece of data had been surgically removed. And in the middle of that gap, a single access port was open for 4 hours and then closed exactly 3 minutes after the ambush in Vainar. The server that granted that access was registered under an Aegis shell company. 3 days later, at 2:43 a.m., Noah sent me an audio file restored from an internal Aegis backup, hidden under a fake file name and fragmented data. In it, Damien's voice was as clear as a dagger. Father put on the pressure. Now it's your turn. Just make it convincing enough to shut her up for good. I didn't cry. I didn't swear. I just sat there, listening to the confirmation of what I had known for a long time. The second file was an electronic contract signed the morning after the attack, worth tens of millions, between Command and Aegis Logistics, with no oversight clause. The signatory, Marcus Cross. I didn't file a complaint. I didn't believe in the investigation committee. An official process would be buried in paperwork, dragging on for years, long enough for men like my father to retire with pristine medals. I needed something faster, sharper. I drafted an email sending all the evidence, audio, contracts, data schematics, to exactly one person, General Adrian Holt. The subject line, "Sir, the honor of the military is at stake." No explanation, no plea, just the truth. 3 days later, a summons arrived to attend the Armed Forces Commendation Ceremony at the National Strategic Hall. No reason was given, but I knew exactly what was about to happen. That night, I wore my Class A dress uniform like a blade, sharply pressed creases, perfectly aligned medals, a collar so tight every breath felt measured. The National Strategic Hall was brilliant under hundreds of chandeliers, but the light here wasn't for warmth. It was for exposing every thread, every flaw, every ill-timed blink. I sat in the front row, not in the middle, not at the back, like always, right in front of the stage, where no one could miss me. Marcus Cross entered 30 minutes after me. To his right was Damien, polished shoes, a smile practiced in a mirror, the look of a man who believed he was untouchable. Both of them shook hands, laughed, and nodded to every senior officer. They didn't look at me. They thought I was insignificant. They didn't know that every seat in this room had been arranged for tonight. When Marcus's name was called, the applause was thunderous. He walked onto the podium with the rigid posture of a man who had lived his whole life for moments like this. His career medal, the pinnacle before retirement, rested in a red velvet box on the award table. Then General Adrian Holt walked out. His voice was low and steady, without urgency, just the weight of a stone dropping into a lake. Before we conclude the ceremony, I have a matter of integrity that needs to be addressed immediately. It cannot wait, the murmuring quieted. The lights on the ceiling dimmed slightly. Behind Holt, a large screen lit up. First was a network diagram. Military communication channels routed through Aegis Logistics servers. Next, an electronic contract began to have its redacted parts revealed, line by line, until the final signature appeared. Marcus Cross. Gasps and the scraping of chairs echoed through the room, but Holt wasn't done. "Play it," he said. Damien's voice rang out, cold and precise. "Father put on the pressure. Now it's your turn. Just make it convincing enough to shut her up for good." Silence fell like a landmine. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of a crowd that had just had their long-held suspicions confirmed. All eyes turned to Marcus and Damien. Damien's lips moved, but no words came out. Marcus was pale, trying to reach for the podium, as if he could still control the narrative. Holt raised a hand, cutting him off. "This is no longer your stage, General." He turned to me. "Major Cross, stand up." I stood, slowly. A row of officers stood with me. Then another row, until the entire hall was standing, not to applaud, not to congratulate, but to acknowledge. 2 military police officers walked up to Damien. He turned to me, his eyes burning with a mix of hatred and disbelief. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed. I didn't answer. Marcus still stood there, lips pressed tight, eyes dark. No one asked him to speak. No one saved the moment. And in that cold, steel-like light, his legacy was dismantled piece by piece. They offered me a promotion the next day. A new nameplate, a new rank, an office at General Command. A letter, printed on thick paper, with the embossed seal of the Secretary of Defense, praising my unwavering commitment to military ethical standards. I declined, not because of a lack of ambition, but because I already had what I needed, and it was never a position. My whole life, I had existed in silence, propriety, and discretion, becoming a shadow that was easy to overlook. But now, for the first time, I didn't need anyone's approval to stand tall. I didn't need to perform for a legacy I never wanted to inherit. When General Holt suggested a teaching position at the Blackridge Advanced Intelligence Academy, I nodded immediately. Deep in the foothills of Blue Hollow, far from the conference rooms where power was exchanged like playing cards, Blackridge wasn't a place of glory. But it was my space. My office was on the third floor of an old administrative building, with low ceilings, scuffed tiles, and a radiator that clanked whenever it got cold. But the walls were mine. The scratched wooden desk was mine. And the quiet, that was mine too. I started with one course, strategic language and behavioral analysis. Then a second. Before long, I became a mentor to the bright but nonconformist recruits, the kids who listened more than they spoke, just like me before. They called my classroom the cipher room. At first, it was just a joke. But then a student carved the words into the wooden strip below the whiteboard. Another carved it into a small piece of wood and left it on my desk. The name stuck, and it wouldn't leave. One Thursday afternoon, Cadet Reyes stayed after class. Her eyes were bright, but her hands were constantly twisting together. "Ma'am," Reyes said, her eyes on the floor, "you've made overthinking not a weakness anymore." I let the silence pass before answering. "It's not a weakness. It's your blade. Just because others can't hear it doesn't mean it's not sharp." That evening, I got home and found a package on my doorstep. It was a small, heavy box with no return address. Inside was a velvet box. Marcus's West Point officer's ring. No note. No apology. I stood under the kitchen light, turning the ring in my hand. A legacy burned to ash, now placed in my hand as a final move in a game I had long since quit. I closed the box and put it in a drawer where I kept my old nameplates and the retirement party invitation I had never replied to. Marcus could try to give me what was left of him. But I had built my own part, with bone, with language, with silence honed into a signal. The envelope arrived on a cloudy Monday morning. No postage stamp, just neat handwriting. To Evelyn. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Aunt Marianne in Maine. Inside was an old photo, the silver edges beginning to fade. I was about 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the old living room rug, surrounded by the language puzzle pieces my mother had made for me. Ink was smudged on my hands. My cheeks were red with excitement, and my eyes were fixed on the scattered letters as if I was trying to piece the whole world together. On the back of the photo, Marianne had written, "This is the person your mother always saw, strong, focused, and never asking anyone for permission to be herself." I sat for a long time, my fingers tracing the letters. But then my eyes stopped at a small detail in the bottom left corner of the photo, almost hidden by the edge of the table. A symbol, not a pattern on the rug, not a stain. It was a string of characters, a mix of letters and numbers that I had seen somewhere before. I stood up and pulled open the filing cabinet. I rummaged through the Aegis Logistics documents, and there I found it, in an encrypted file, hidden in the metadata comments of the contract Marcus had signed. It was a perfect match. It couldn't be a coincidence. My mother died when I was 10, but this symbol said that, somehow, she had touched the same network that Aegis was operating, or fighting against. And if so, this story didn't start with me. I put the photo in my desk drawer, right under the carved piece of wood that said Cipher Room. But as I closed the drawer, I knew I wouldn't be able to leave it there for long. That night, I didn't sleep. The photo lay on my desk, the desk lamp casting a faded yellow light on my young face, and on the symbol in the corner of the photo, like a whisper from the past. I opened my computer and entered the string of characters into an offline decoder. No results. I tried reversing it, separating the letters from the numbers, and then reassembling them, according to a permutation cipher model I had seen in my mother's old documents. A part of the string appeared. Not a complete sentence, just 3 words. Raven Directive 1. I leaned back in my chair. Raven Directive was not a phrase a 10-year-old could invent, and it was definitely not something I should know. It had never appeared in any public FMIB database. The secure phone on my desk gave a short buzz. No message, no missed call, just a ping signal, the kind that only those with the highest level of access could send. A signal I had never received since my mother died. I looked at the West Point ring still sitting in the drawer, beneath the old nameplates. Then I looked back at the photo. If Raven Directive was real, then Marcus and Damien were just the tip of the iceberg. And maybe, in the depths of that iceberg, I would find the answers about my mother's death and the reason she left me a clue hidden for over 20 years. I turned off the light and put the photo in my jacket pocket. Outside the window, Blue Hollow was shrouded in fog, silent as if it were listening. I whispered, so no one but myself could hear. The game isn't over.